Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Professor Jordan's Whys of History, where catchy tagline here. In this episode, I'll be looking at one of the very few single events in history I would argue changed the lives of just about every single person on the planet. No, that was faked. No, he's still alive. No, that wasn't really that important, really. Definitely not. I'm talking, of course, about the departure of 3 tiny ships from Palos, Spain, under the leadership of one Christopher Columbus in 1492. While Columbus's voyages would bring about many things, including a sizable drop then explosion of the world's population, a massive restructuring of the world's ecosystems, the rise of many of the major world powers of the modern era, and the beginnings of a globalized world, this show is about why, so we're going to look at what it was about the old world that led Columbus to hit the new world and bring about the modern world. Before we get too into it, let's fire up our brains with our totally relevant random word for this episode. Our totally relevant random word is unforeseeable, specifically in the realm of a result or outcome that someone simply could not have predicted, expected, or envisioned. As an example, if I'm about to watch someone jump off of, say, a London hospital roof, I could reasonably foresee, based on the height of the roof and the way the person falls, how badly the person might be hurt or killed. However, if the second that guy jumps off the roof, he gets devoured by an Alaskan bullworm or turns up later after being pronounced dead, well, that is something that I simply could never, in my wildest imagination, have seen coming. Those second examples, while silly, would simply be unforeseeable. While this episode is about why Columbus left for the Americas, Columbus's voyages very much encapsulate this idea of unforeseeable, as everything I listed at the beginning of this episode were consequences of Columbus's adventures that he could never have seen coming. However, Columbus has, as a historical figure, received large amounts of praise and criticism for unleashing forces he simply could not have foreseen or understood, while much of what he actually did is generally ignored. So now I'm going to look at what the event itself was, then go into some detail, then I'm going to do my best to point out some of the irony of Columbus, all in the neighborhood of 15 minutes. Quite a feat, I know. Almost like trying to sail halfway across the world using a route no one was actually sure existed. To refresh everyone's memory, Christopher Columbus was an Italian explorer who, backed by Italian investors and representing Spain, sailed across the Atlantic Ocean in 1492 CE in search of India and/or China/Japan / kind of Indonesia, all more or less, or what he called the East Indies. Columbus felt this was a reasonable alternative to traveling there via the Middle East or sailing around Africa for reasons I'll discuss here in a minute, but also because his geographical and navigational understanding of the Eastern Hemisphere was pretty loose at best. Not only did Columbus dramatically overestimate the size of Eurasia, he really only had vague guesswork of where India even was, and relied on a small handful of European stories, many of them completely fake, to know what he might find if he actually ever did get to India. In the spirit of correcting some more misconceptions, Columbus was not the first documented European to reach the Americas, as Viking Leif Erikson, Jürgen, had him beat by about 500 years. And despite what Bugs Bunny might tell you, people didn't think Columbus was crazy because Columbus believed the earth was round. People thought Columbus was crazy because, by the accepted calculations at the time, the Atlantic Ocean was considered much too large to cross. So why did Columbus sail into waters that, as far as he knew, A, had never actually been navigated by humans, B, could be far too large to actually navigate, and C, might not actually take him to India? And why on earth would anyone with any serious influence and/or wealth support or fund such a mission? Before we get into more detail, it's worth noting that while we don't think of sailing across an ocean as that big a deal today, Columbus's journey can be seen as the 15th century equivalent of a modern manned space mission. Expensive, risky for everyone involved, and with an absurd number of variables that needed to align just right in order for everything to work out. Much like a space mission, there was also a hefty amount of glory and prestige to be gained by a successful operation, both for the people/country who supported the venture and the people who undertook it. While space missions tend to be more focused on science and bettering humanity's understanding of the universe, Columbus was very much focused on fame and bettering the numbers in his bank accounts. This whole "I'm so awesome" thing wouldn't work out so well for Columbus, as 3 of his 4 missions were pretty disastrous, all things considered, and he ended up being stripped of his land, money, and titles by the Spanish crown when all was said and done. So not only was Columbus out to make a name for himself and bring glory to Spain, Columbus was a devout Christian, specifically the Catholic variety, and it's no coincidence his voyages were primarily backed by the Spanish monarchy. The King and Queen of Spain, Juan Ferdinand, no, still not those guys, and Isabella were Catholic, and they were all filled with crusading zeal and all up on their high horses after forcibly removing all non-Catholics, namely Muslims and Jews, from Spain during the Reconquista. Columbus, both due to his own faith and in an attempt to suck up to the people who funded his adventures, went out to convert the people of India to Christianity, hoping/assuming he could lay the groundwork for the Christianization of China and the rest of Asia as well. This also wouldn't work out so well for him, because even if he had reached the East Indies, a different foreign religion, Islam, had reached India long before Columbus ever set sail. Finally, while Ferdinand and Isabella were after the conversion of the East, they were also investors, paying for Columbus's boats and supplies on the assumption that a successful voyage would bring in more money than they had spent. They sought to do this through access to Asian goods, including silk, tea, gold, and most notably, spices. While today it seems silly to send someone halfway across the world to bring back some cinnamon, when the only thing you have to flavor your food is salt, a dash of pepper or basil sounds pretty damn appealing. While Europeans had been able to access these goods in fairly limited supply through the Silk Road and the Middle East, all that crusading nonsense and the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Turks meant that trade with the increasingly hostile Muslims in the East was becoming riskier and less reliable by Columbus's time. Not only that, but it was a whole lot cheaper and a whole lot easier to carry large quantities of goods by boat. And spices were so valuable in Europe that Columbus and his investors knew that discovering a water route to the east that Europeans could traverse without the need for Muslim middlemen could bring them an almost unimaginable amount of money. Now, lest you think Columbus was only after goods with practical value, he also sought gold. Gold! As Europeans were never short of rumors of places with ridiculous amounts of gold. Again, Columbus would lose out here as well, as he found no water route to Asia and came nowhere close to any Native Americans with any serious kind of material wealth to trade or take. So, seeking to make a name for himself and bring fame to Spain, spread Christianity, and gain access to spices and gold, Columbus set off in 1492 in his 3 little ships for India, only to land roughly 16,000 kilometers away on a small Caribbean island in the Bahamas he named San Salvador, but was better known as Guanahani to the people who already lived there. People who had little interest in foreign gods and little gold or pepper for Columbus to take back home. So that's Columbus in a nutshell, but as always, it gets far more complicated than that. In part 2, we'll be looking at the religious and cultural motivations of our favorite Italian explorer, and then, of course, I'll be interjecting some thought-provoking stuff there at the end. Click on Columbus's face over here for part 2, and thank you very much for watching. Last time I checked, I was Professor Jordan, and I will see you all next class. Hello and welcome, sports fans. Exactly.